when the brain is guided by a heart that is willing to be wrong, instead of a heart that insists that I'm always right, then magical things happen. Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to get to my notes here. So today's topic is something that I have struggled with for many years, and I'm sure I'll continue to for many more years to come. And that is, how capable is our brain? Both by conditioning and perhaps even by education, but certainly by the evidence of science and technology around us, we are used to approaching all problems through our brain. In fact, it's entered our language. We say, well, think about it a little more. Maybe why don't you read about this? Why don't you deliberately reflect on it a little bit more? These are the ways that we are taught to approach problems. And there's many of you joining us online. Hi. And whether you're across the street or across the state or across the world, if you are looking at this on your liquid crystal display, then some set of very clever people worked very hard to make sure that that worked. And the fact that there is a fiber optic cable running here and probably under the Pacific Ocean, and there is a microphone and a camera that takes the video and the words and converts it to electromagnetic waves and then to light and brings it to you in crystal clarity, all is the culmination of perhaps 400 years of extraordinarily clever brain work by people that were very, very devoted to truth. And this is, I certainly believe this to be true, that no matter what the problem is on the outside, in the outside world, eventually our brains will find a way of overcoming it. There is certainly no problem in creation that cannot be encompassed by the brain, whether it's cure for cancer or making the environment better or building a smaller, cheaper smartphone. Doesn't matter what it is, it will eventually be done. But then this very powerful tool falters a little bit, stumbles a little bit when it's deployed to the deeper problems of life. Can I use my brain to understand God? Well, the answer, babe, you all heard the reading. The answer is no. Or is it no? Minimally, it's yes and no. Maybe it's yes. So we need to unpack this a little bit. We cannot take it as a point of faith that we need to toss the brain aside when we address the big problems in life. Not only is it unnatural, it's also not a very good thing to do. So what the brain can do is it can think about a problem, not necessarily get us out of the problem. Einstein very famously said, is supposed to have said, that the same consciousness that that created the problem cannot be used to solve that problem. The reason is these bigger problems. Let's say, Yogananda used to say that there is only two reasons why we do anything. And one is because there is something that we dislike and we don't want that anymore. So we do all kinds of actions to avoid it. The other is that there is something that we like, and therefore we want it all the time. So therefore, everything from acquisition to possession to greed to anger all comes from one of these two things. And for those of us on the spiritual path, we can perhaps add a third one to that, which is to say many actions, hopefully all actions soon, will be done to figure out God's presence in our lives. So between these three, we do everything. And for these kinds of things, what is required is personal change. And so Swami Kriyananda said that no matter what difficulty we are facing, at least a part of the solution, if not all of it, lies in changing ourselves. So here the brain stumbles a little bit because analyzing a situation, paralyzing ourselves with that analysis turns out to be a defense mechanism that the ego uses to stop the change from happening. You see, there is something very subtle going on here. So can we understand God by deeply thinking and reading? Can we invent an algorithm or a pill that is going to help us suffer less? Well, pills have been tried with interesting results around it, but the most they do is numb the feeling, not really help us get over it. So let's pause and think for a little bit. Why is it that the brain cannot understand God? And it turns out that there is a very, very deep spiritual reason behind it. It cuts to the heart of how we are built. Many years ago, probably 11 or so years ago, I was on a flight from Seattle to Dubai. It's a 15-hour flight, and I was changing planes in Dubai on my way to India. And back in the, at the time, I was still working for Microsoft, and for many reasons, I was able to fly business class. And in there, you have your seat turns into a bed. And so I was about 2 hours into the flight, and they fed me a very good meal. And they turned down the lights in the cabin, and they asked us to shut off all the windows. And this seat turned into a bed, and then I slept very deeply. And somewhere in the middle, I woke up, not because anything happened, I just woke up, and there was a moment of confusion. Like, where am I? The plane was in level flight, so I had no sensation of movement whatsoever. So when I woke up in a darkened cabin, it felt like I was in my bed, but what is this infernal noise that's coming from everywhere? It's the noise of the engine. And then I looked around, and all of this took maybe 2 seconds or so. And then I remembered that, I'm on an airplane. I remembered, because if I looked around my situation in a darkened cabin, lying in a bed with no sensation of movement, and just used my brain to figure this out, there is no way it would come up with the real answer. The real answer was I was 38,000 feet in the air in a metal cylinder flying at 650 miles an hour. The testimony of my senses and my brain will be completely impossible for it to come up with this conclusion. I had to either have the memory that I got here, or I had to open the window and let the light in and then look out. Those are the only 2 ways. In other words, our spiritual life is like this, that we are limited by the body. We are limited, even in the body, we are limited by many self-definitions, that I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm old, I'm young, and this and that, all those kinds of self-definitions. And just by thinking alone, it's not possible to realize who we really are. You see, that's where the limitation comes in, is the testimony of the senses. That's what the brain is good at processing. The testimony of the senses will only show us the reality that we have experienced. In other words, the brain can only reason about what the heart has already felt. Otherwise, there is no other frame of reference for the brain to go beyond that. So this, like in this airplane, if I open the window and the light in, similarly, if I open my heart and let the light of God in, then suddenly the larger reality becomes clear. Until then, you can tie yourself up in analysis, you can read all the great scriptures of the world, and it doesn't amount to a hill of beans as far as these bigger problems are concerned. Now, speaking of light, there's this beautiful description. So it's all about feeling, right? As we rise above this miasma of body consciousness, and all the self-definitions that it brings, then the consciousness itself, which doesn't have any such limitations, begins to discover its true feeling, that it comes into the heart as a feeling. Where as we rise above the consciousness, that the feeling that comes in, Yogananda called it as Satchidanandam, ever existing, ever new bliss. That it's the body that circumscribes the consciousness. The infinity is bound by the finite through the medium of the body, and once it rises up there, then what is left is a feeling of oneness, and that feeling of oneness comes with it this bliss. And it comes with it this beautiful description that Yogananda gives, that how would it feel in the heart when we've gone beyond the body consciousness. Now it says, the entire cosmos, gently luminous, like a city seen afar at night, glimmered within the infinitude of my being. The sharply etched global outlines faded somewhat at the farthest edges. There, I could see a mellow radiance, ever undiminished. It was indescribably subtle. And it goes on and on. This is from Autobiography of a Yogi, from the chapter in Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. And there are other descriptions of these, but notice that it is capturing into words what is already a feeling, but what comes before is the feeling. Then how do we get there? Thinking, as I hope I have established, is not enough. So there are two ways that God comes to us. One is through the doorway of the heart, and the other is through the doorway of the intuition. And the doorway of the heart is first. There is in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, it's a very mysterious chapter. It's all about how to recognize the second coming, and it's really quite extraordinary. And in there is one sentence that Jesus says. He says, two shall be working in the field. One shall be taken, and the other left. And what this means, I mean, there are many ways of looking at it, but one obvious way is that it doesn't matter what we are on the outside. Two people, they are both working on the field, and on the outside they both look the same. But if at all times we think of God and we live for God and sense His doership behind, then God steals our heart. One shall be taken and the other left behind. That's why Yogananda said that God watches the heart, and it doesn't matter the level of thoughts, the great big thoughts that we have in mind, it doesn't amount to anything, but God watches the heart. And what hardens the heart? What prevents it from expanding? There is Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's Guru, Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here. And Sri Yukteswar is his Guru. If you can see the altar behind me, he's just above Paramahansa Yogananda. He used to say that in order for the heart to open, we need to overcome the meanness of the heart. That mean-spiritedness. And what does that mean? We kind of know what that means. It's a word in English and it has connotations, but it's useful to look at it in a little bit more detail. I lived in India for about 22 years, and then the rest of the time I've lived here over 30 years. And I'm truly a product of both these cultures. There are rooms in my mind. There is an India room and there is a America room, and they share a common kitchen and bathroom. It's they kind of really coexist. And often, when I go to India, somebody asks me some question, and I find myself hard to remove their judgment around what goes on here. And the same thing is true here. Somebody asked me a question about India, and I find it hard to remove the judgment around it. So a very common example is how you enter a temple or a place of worship. In India, it's You remove your shoes, you remove your socks, you wash your feet, and you enter the temple with actually wet, washed feet. And then when I say, well, here we just wear the shoes into a church, like, how could you do that? That's so weird. And then when I come here, I'm sure if I walked in here bare feet, that would be very odd. So how my mind has dealt with it is, when I'm in India, I really feel odd to go into a temple with my shoes on, and I really feel odd to walk into a church without my shoes on. But in both cases, we miss the point, because the place of worship, the heart needs to be pure, not the feet. It doesn't matter as long as the feet are not stinky. It's perfectly fine whether you wear shoes or don't wear it. But this becomes a fairly ununderstandable issue on both sides. And this is kind of where the meanness of the heart comes in. It's really as simple as this, that people are often convinced that somehow their viewpoint is exactly right. They don't even do it to be mean. I certainly have my list of those things that I'm convinced is exactly right. But the meanness comes kind of in a subtle way. I will say, all the people that don't feel like I do are exactly wrong. And again, this is unconscious. Most of us definitely don't think of it that way. And when it's pointed out to us, we don't identify ourselves in that way. But we certainly comport ourselves in that fashion, unknowingly. This pride of my opinion, my people, my tribe, my nation, my this, my religion, my that, all of that stuff, this hardens the heart and makes it less expansive. See, the whole point of this is what we look at as our reality. The whole point of God is that it lies at, as it said in the chant, it lies at the fringes of my mind. I see you, Lord, at the fringes of my mind. Reveal thyself. That's where we are going. So there are many practices to open the heart. And of course, there is chanting and there is service and so on, kindness and compassion, all of those active practices. But I want to suggest another one, which is a little more subtle. And nobody knows that you are doing it, but you can practice it at all times. And it's very hard to do. It's not very easy. And what that is the internal willingness to be wrong. Okay? Truth can come to us from any place, from anybody. They could be not as accomplished as us. They could be, if we are in a hierarchical organization, they might be lower down in the hierarchy. If we are older, they might be younger. In all the other ways that we establish a mental hierarchy, saying either I'm right or you are right, this willingness to be wrong. I don't mean give up your confidence and be completely wishy-washy. That has its own problems. It is more that walking into any life situation with the internal flexibility to say, what if they are right? What if things don't have to be this way? That kind of a practice. This is, the more we are willing to be wrong, the more we are able to listen. You see, that's where it comes from, and the more we listen, that's the very essence of receptivity. The truth, because the truth as we know it has to be destroyed in order to find the truth that always exists, the willingness to listen and the willingness to be wrong is one of the most important things that is going to soften the heart. And this is important even in material life too, even in outside life. Some of the most successful people that I have met are people that first sit and listen. No matter who is saying something, they are always ready to learn. And they have opinions, of course, but then they say, well, let me make sure that I haven't missed anything. It might start with something as simple as that the next time we are in a group setting or something happens to us which goes against what we think it ought to have been, well, what if this is right? Let me examine my basic assumptions. And this is a hard practice because it's the heart that resists this. The brain is perfectly fine with this. The brain has no such compunctions, but the heart says, no, 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 don't go there because it makes me feel bad. So that's a very important practice because, you see, the brain is very necessary. Our faculty of thinking, our faculty of reasoning is very, very important. Yogananda, when he came here, he called the organization he founded as Self-Realization Fellowship. It's a bit of a play on words. One part, of course, is its realization of the self, but the other part is its realization through self-effort, self-realization. And therefore, it is not an indiscriminate, you tell me what to do, I'll stop thinking for myself, and whatever you do, whatever you ask me, I'll just do it. That cannot lead to anywhere good. When the brain is guided by a heart that is willing to be wrong, instead of a heart that insists that, because you see, this is the last part of this little trail of breadcrumbs that I'm placing here, is on the spiritual path, we already are that which we want to be. The joy that we seek is already within us. It is just covered by crud. So the spiritual path is not one of acquisition, but one of purification, one of revelation. There's a beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita. It says, Dhumena vriyate vachnir yathadarsho malena cha yatolbena avrato garbho tatha tene idam avratam. And it says, just like fire is obscured by smoke, and the mirror is obscured by dirt, and just as the fetus is covered within the womb, in the same way, that, meaning our higher nature, is covered by this, meaning the limiting set of self-identities. And therefore, the work of the brain is not so much to understand, but to eliminate misunderstanding. You see, those are two entirely different things. For the brain to switch modes, this extraordinarily powerful faculty that has given us all of these things, just you can spend lifetime studying how my voice and my image goes across the country or wherever and comes up on your screen. There is that much of brain power in it. But for it to switch gears from understanding to eliminating misunderstanding, what is required is for the heart to be open to being wrong. When it's guided by a heart that is open to being wrong, and that way of saying it sounds a little negative, so let me say it in the right way. For a heart that is filled with humility, the brain becomes the most powerful weapon because it is no longer a weapon of understanding or creation, but rather it's a weapon of discrimination. That's what today's affirmation said, is with the sword of discrimination, I cut the heartstrings. So it's those two need to work together. So by thinking alone, can I come to understanding? Well, the answer is, by thinking alone, you can eliminate all misunderstandings until what is left is only the truth, as long as the heart is willing to be humble. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.